Hey there, welcome back to the Counter Service Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Jacobson, and this is a podcast dedicated to teaching organizations how to learn. Well, last month, the last four episodes have been focused on your personal leadership approach to 2023. I want this month to pivot a little bit, to really pivot to those you work alongside each and every day. And it is through their story that your leadership story might actually be more complete. So across the counter today, I have the incredible opportunity to learn from Charisse Williams as we discuss her story through the book, The Joy of Thriving While Black. Charisse is a certified leadership and well-being coach who helps individual leaders and teams harness their strengths and fuel their visions. A lawyer by training, former consultant, and 25-year veteran of the nonprofit sector, she understands and has lived through the challenges that leaders face at work, in life. So, Charisse, welcome to the Counter Service Leadership Podcast.
Hey, it is so great to be here. And I love your quote about understanding other people's stories, making yours complete. Because that's
Yes.
basically what the book did. Okay, we're done.
Okay, we're done. And close.
Yeah,
This is
so beautiful.
Well, I just have it's really hit me over the past year that, and by the way, the theme of this year's podcast is built around my one word. So I don't know if you do a one word for the year, but my one word for the year, strangely enough, is uncertainty. But it's really about the upside of uncertainty. And so what's interesting is that it is based on a particular book called The Upside of Uncertainty. But what's so interesting about it, it says, if there's anything that I am certain about, then I eliminate any other possibility.
Yeah.
So it's really hit me over the past year that there are times that I can still be convicted about something, but maybe my full story is incomplete. And it's through others and their story that actually makes my story more complete. So it's the willingness to be open to that is so critical. So, do we have to continue? I don't know.
I love what you just said though about uncertainty. When I was going through yoga teacher training, one of the things my teacher would say is, what if you move through the world saying less I know and more I wonder?
Yes, come on.
And it changes everything.
Mm-hmm. Curiosity, wonder is such a fuel for movement and openness and change and transformation. So I love that. As our audience can already tell from this podcast, if they're watching it, you are such a bright light. Your smile is so infectious. You just evoke so much. And I know we've worked a little bit in the past. It's been a while since we've reconnected. So I'm glad the book allows us to reconnect. But you're such a bright light. And thanks for shining your light on me today. I really am grateful for it.
Brett, thank you for that. And I keep interjecting when you say something, and I know you want to move on.
I know, I've got a script here. Come on.
So I went through an exercise with another coach. Her name is Joyce Chen. Okay. And it was a branding exercise, but it took you through your whole life stories, the ups and downs. Oh. And the end goal was to come up with your why. And it's not like a purpose. It's like why you exist. And what we landed on, which I did not say to anyone out loud for a whole year.
Yeah, tell me what
because I felt like it was corny.
Yeah.
But people kept saying it to me. And that statement is to shine my light and reflect the light in others. That's my actual purpose.
Okay.
A reason for existing.
Yes.
So thank you for seeing that.
That is so perfect. So my why is to set the conditions for people to do what they've been called to do. So I'll let others judge whether I'm living out that purpose, but that is my why. So I love that you've actually shared that with us today too. So we're going to actually see more of that, I think, in reflection of our discussion. So I think that's a great way to start. So this is what I love. I think there's so many different directions to go into your book. People should certainly pick this up. So we're going to go in a few directions today. So hold on, buckle up a little bit. But I love this, by the way, the starting out of your book, because you dedicate the book to your mother, Willette, is I'm pronouncing her first name correctly, Willette Marie Sanders, and your grandparents, Wilhelmina Avery. By the way, love that first name, because my 99-year-old grandmother passed in this past June, and her first name was Nelda. So when do you hear the name Wilhelmina and Nelda anymore?
Yeah.
Oh,
good Southern name.
How good is that? And Rufus Sanders, Beatrice White, and Fred Williams. So, I mean, it's like, where do you start with that list? I don't even know these people, but I could just feel off the page, because I know you a little bit, that you were standing on the shoulders of these people. So tell us why you dedicated the book to them.
The book, I didn't necessarily set out to write a memoir. I thought I was going to be giving like these tips to thrive.
Right.
But what you said earlier, like I actually did start to reflect on my own story as I was hearing other people's.
Yeah.
And I was struck at the time that I decided to write the book. What a privilege and honor it was to be self-employed, to have a new business, to have the mental and emotional and financial space to do something like write a book. And it occurred, that the phrase "I am my ancestors' wildest dreams" is out there in the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
But I thought about these ancestors as I was embarking upon this, and I felt like, what a journey that I'm not sure that my mother could have fathomed, but I'm not sure that my grandparents could have ever fathomed.
Yeah. So is there a story? I mean, I think since my grandmother has passed, before her passing and then after, there are these childhood stories that I recall of my engagement with her. And this is a woman that had a 6th grade education, but she could cursive write like nobody's business, and managed everything around her. And she was the person that ran the show, which is so great. But is there a particular story, I don't know, from any one of those names that feel like, that was sort of a moment of impact, not necessarily knowing it at the time, but now that you live in life now, like that was critical, that was important in your trajectory?
What comes to mind is the fact that my mother, my maternal grandmother Wilhelmina, maternal aunts and uncles, there's so many educators in my life. Like elementary school, public school teachers.
By the way, when they got the book, did they say, hello, where's my name?
No. Okay, and I'm actually talking about like grandparents' generations who have now passed on. But it's, again, like my mother told me, so side story, when I was 5 or 6 years old, my dad taught me how to ride my bike. The very next day, I had all the kids in the neighborhood surrounding me on the corner so I could teach them how to ride their bikes. So my mother is like, "Girl, you are a teacher."
Yes.
She's like, I won't dissuade you, nor would I encourage you to be a Chicago public school teacher. But I think I get from her, the storytelling, the teaching, the sharing, that has been a thread throughout my entire community, career, and was part of the impetus of writing the book. And
Yeah.
actually, both of my parents, I was just talking to a friend of mine about this. Both of my parents are really hilarious, great storytellers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I like to think I get it honest.
Yeah. No, that's great. And then you might have based on part of your answer, maybe answering this, but so I'm curious in terms of learning from your story to make my story more complete is just thinking about, where were you born and what was your childhood like growing up?
Yeah, so I was born on the south side of Chicago, and I always tell people if you want to know where I grew up, read any of Michelle Obama's books because
Okay.
we grew up in the same neighborhood, and I love
Wow.
hearing her talk about riding the bus to school. It's
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, that's my
Yeah.
whole childhood. But my mother, so I was born on the south side of Chicago and raised there. My mother was born and raised in Augusta, Georgia. My
Okay.
father was raised in Chicago, but his family had moved from Arkansas when he was a baby. And I spent summers in the South. So there was a great
Oh,
contrast
okay.
between, growing up in a working class Chicago neighborhood that wasn't always super safe to run around in, but going to school and thinking about like my childhood being centered in Hyde Park, which is a very diverse community around the University of Chicago. So, after school activities, having the freedom to walk around safely, go to my Chicago Children's Choir rehearsals,
Mhm.
and then as coming to the South every summer, a big highlight of that, because my cousins, I saw them a lot, but they were living their own lives because they lived
Mhm.
there. I would go to my grandmother's daycare center a lot with
Yeah.
her and help out. And, sometimes I'd engage with the kids.
Yeah.
But pretty sweet contrast. And I'm glad I got both of those experiences.
Yeah. And so your bachelor's is from Cornell, and I don't know why I didn't remember this, but your JD's from Northwestern. So um, sort of what was like life at Cornell and Northwestern? Maybe divergent experiences, but sort of what was life like for you there?
Yeah. So I ended up going to Cornell for a summer program the summer after my
Mm.
junior year in high school.
Okay.
And I almost wish it was a better story. Like I took the
No,
PSAT
it's your story.
and
It's all good.
right and got this started getting mail and it was so cool to actually get physical mail from
Yeah, right.
colleges.
Yes.
And I saw the pictures of Cornell, and I saw that they had a summer program, and I was like, I want to go there for the summer. And I went as a high school student. I got to earn college credit, and I applied early decision and got in. The only other school I had to apply for was U of I because I was in Illinois. Actually, I don't even know if I applied, but anyway, I took a psychology course, some other course, and an Africana studies course when
Mm.
I was at Cornell. I didn't even know what Africana meant, but it was like studies, a multidisciplinary study of the African diaspora.
Yeah.
I dug the course. I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. And by the way, Brett, I've never had a plan
Yeah.
career-wise my entire life. I've just followed my passion and
Yeah.
curiosity. And I was like, okay, I'll go here and I'll major in this. And I experienced two very different worlds, and I write about this in the book. On the one hand, this is in the 90s. So there were really great, robust, strong programs that encouraged and nurtured students of color on campus.
Yeah.
The Black population at Cornell was 5%.
Okay.
So I lived in like this program house that was like building community and, amongst Black folks and allies. I was an Africana studies major. I was in this cultural dance company. I also got to earn work study for my leadership role in the
Yeah.
company, which was amazing. The campus was beautiful. Classes were great. And people often told me to my face, oh, you're here because of affirmative action
Oh, wow.
or question, or like I'd be in classes and I
Mhm.
never get called on, but
Mhm.
we're reading Toni Morrison. And it's like, Black girl, you're Black, she's Black.
Yeah.
You might have something to
Yeah.
say about that.
Yeah.
So it was really bizarre. It was often challenging.
Yeah.
Most of the students of color who went to Cornell lived in New York or lived closer. So I
Okay.
also found out that I was culturally different. Like I didn't know how different New York was from Chicago.
Yeah, right. True.
And, I was teased for like sounding white or sounding country. And I'm talking about by other Black folks.
Right.
But all that to say, it was some of those programs and safe spaces and offices dedicated to my success that really sustained me and nurtured me to excel there. I don't know that I would have ever finished it, but
Yeah.
for those things.
Yeah. No, that is so interesting, especially how you've described Chicago and then coming here in the South during the summer. And then obviously from a collegiate standpoint, you had even different experiences, which, continue to expand your story in many ways beyond what you knew sort of at the time. Well, let's take a little bit even deeper into the book. I think you've answered this a little bit, but I was thinking about, what did you attempt to do in this book? You do indicate that that is a part memoir, part invitation for self-reflection at the intersection between Blackness and well-being. So, so wrapping all that up a little bit, tell us more about that intersection and the different parts that you feel are reflected in a book that you wrote.
Yeah. So let me give you a peek behind the curtain and say that, I wrote the introduction last and kind of had to figure out what I had
What am I
said,
introducing?
right? To be honest.
Yeah.
So, my original book, Brett, was a month by month account of me going through the pandemic and all that was happening.
Okay.
So chapter 1 was January, chapter 2 was February.
Yeah.
And that's what it was when I turned in my
Yeah.
first draft. And somehow it was like, oh my gosh, we're not through the year yet. Do I have enough distance to make sense of this book or to make sense of this year? And so I completely changed it and threw out a lot of that. So it's kind of like how it was originally how I thrived in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I can honestly tell you is that I got the spark to write this book in a moment in time that I talk about in the book.
Hmm.
We're in this pandemic for 6 months. It is scary. It is depressing. George Floyd had been killed, Breonna Taylor. And I was like, I am not going to survive this news cycle.
Right.
I have got to, these stories are important,
Yeah.
but just like anything else, they do not represent all that is happening in the world or in the lives of Black people.
Mm-hmm.
So I started with the interviews and just getting people. I got 50 people to tell me their story. And oftentimes where I thought they would land in the book based on my assumptions isn't where they landed.
Yeah.
So after I did all the interviews, rather than saying, okay, this is what I think it takes to thrive, I looked at themes from the interviews and came up with these kind of, okay, you got to know who you are and be proud of it. Like that helps, right? Community, safe spaces, and then, kind of habits and mindsets like finding joy and resilience. So I let the interviewers drive the mission of the book, the message of the book, and then I found my stories that mapped to theirs.
So
But I
how
wanted
did
people.
yeah, so just sorry to interject, but it made me think about where we started the conversation about part of why I have these type of interviews is to hear someone's story to make my story more complete. And yet you were interviewing other people and listening to their stories, whether it's an example or how did their story actually make your story more complete by interviewing all these different people while it set up the stages of this book and the chapters and the stories, but how did that have an impact on you? How did their story make your story even more complete?
Yep. I mean, the main thing was them sparking memories. So we were told to do like 20-minute interviews. And at first, when I was doing it just like this, I would hesitate. I wouldn't respond very much. I would just only respond to what the other person was saying and ask follow-up questions. But then as pieces of my story started coming to me, I was like, you know what? Let me say these real out loud so
Yeah.
I can get them recorded. Oh, there's so many things. Like, I have a girlfriend, Angie, I talk about in the chapter on resilience, who's a 2-time breast cancer survivor.
Wow.
I'd known her for a long time, and she told stories that took place while I knew her,
Oh, wow.
but I didn't know pieces of the story. And I didn't know how she viewed me. So sometimes these would just devolve into catching up,
Yeah.
crying, you know.
Yeah.
Another story that's very different is that I had met this guy named Delroy at the gathering spot where I'm a member, and I knew that he was an entrepreneur, and I think I saw him posting on Instagram that he'd bought a farm,
Wow.
and I'm obsessed with farms.
Okay.
So I was like, "Hey, can I interview you for the book and find out what caused you to buy this farm?" So he told me his whole story. I ended up going out to the farm. We ended up doing volunteer days together. I ended up teaching yoga on the farm. It
Wow.
became my happy place during the pandemic.
That's it.
So
I did
the
not know.
last point I'll share on this is that, I wrote the book through a program called the Creator Institute.
Mhm.
I have to shout them out because it was an incredible
Yeah.
process. But I really, I lost my train of thought. Going to the farm.
It was your happy place during the pandemic. You were teaching yoga.
Yeah, I hadn't been with people in person
Mhm.
during the pandemic. So also like this, meeting someone who'd created a farm gave me a place to go. And so, I know what I was gonna say.
Mhm.
So I this book went from idea to published in 10 months.
Wow.
I had a long list of these superstar celebrities I would have loved to interview. It can take a really long time to book them.
Mhm.
Every single person I interviewed ended up being someone I already knew,
Wow.
whether they were a really, really close
Mhm.
friend or they were Ryan Wilson, who was the CEO of the Gathering Spot.
Nice.
So I really deepened friendships
Mhm.
throughout this interview process, and I had to give them the excerpts for their feedback and to correct edits. And sometimes I did a second interview to learn more. So it helped me feel connected at a time that we were all feeling really lonely and isolated.
Mhm. I guess we're going to jump into joy a little bit because again, I think this is a perfect title for you because you just exude that. But talk a little bit more about this intersection between Blackness and well-being.
Yeah. So I think if we start with the events that inspired the book in 2020, in my research, I ended up coming across this definition of something that is referred to as a racial mega threat,
Mhm.
and that is a hate crime or race related
Mhm.
incident that is on repeat in the news. We all know that vicarious trauma is a thing, but this is like a race based vicarious
Mhm.
trauma that has you on high alert and very stressed. Add that to the fact that the Medical Association has named racism
Mhm.
as a public health um, crisis.
Mhm.
So it's like ultimately every single human being needs the
Mhm.
same things to thrive,
Mhm.
right? Food, clothing, shelter, community. But when you are a person of color in the United States, and
Mhm.
this applies to other groups, a
Yeah.
differently abled person, an immigrant community, to get to thriving, there may be some additional barriers you have to overcome.
Mhm.
There may be times that you need to buffer yourself
Mhm.
from all the noise in communities with like-minded people
Mhm.
and or people of your own identity. And the other thing that you might have to overcome is your own self-belief
Mhm.
about what is or not possible because you're Black.
Mm-hmm.
So I talk a bit about that explicitly in the final chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we internalize all the isms,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then it's like, oh, well, nobody Black has ever done that, so why even try?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the intersection for me.
Yeah. So I think the audience of the Counter Service Leadership Podcast is reflective of many industries, not necessarily the one that I reside in on a daily basis. So I love that aspect of the audience. So we're really talking about any sort of marketplace leader and organization. So I think just taking up from what you've just talked about, what should a leader know in, let's say, onboarding a person of color that could help that leader to have a more complete story, but also to be a better support system to set the conditions for that person to do what he or she's been called to do in representing that organization, and connected to that is about mentorship for advancement. And once an advancement takes place, what can leaders do? What can leaders know or should be thinking about as working with a person of color in either onboarding or mentoring for advancement, or when advancement occurs within your organization that one might not be thinking about, but yet helpful to providing the type of support at this intersection in which you've so eloquently discussed?
Yeah. Brett, I was sweating at first. I was like, gosh, what am I going to say? But the first,
I didn't give you this question in advance.
yes, the first thing that comes to mind, Brett, is sharing your openness to hear and discuss and problem solve around the unique challenges that that person says that they are experiencing because of their identity.
Through that, it made me think about a friend of mine who sort of always asks the question, what voice or voices are we not hearing from that we need to hear from? I think is always a good check for a leader to filter through that question and engage others in answering that question, and then pursue those voices that an organization may not be hearing from.
Yeah. And I'll say one other thing, like, to do that for the first time, if a leader isn't doing it, requires some practice, some mindfulness, some active listening skills, some breathing before reacting and responding, for noticing when your body feels tense and maybe you feel attacked or you want to be reactive. Like, it is a practice. It is a mental practice. It's a somatic practice. It's a spiritual practice. And you have to believe that the results are going to be worth it, or one won't commit to the work.
That's good. Well, in the midst of, at that intersection and the thriving in that section, there's this word joy that you've plopped into the ecosystem. So for you, I guess, how would you define joy? Where do you find it? What brings it out? Let's talk about joy a little bit.
Yeah. So I talk in the book about kind of joy as being a choice to seek out. And I don't mean that it will override feelings of sadness or loneliness or grief or whatever else. But it's like, what brings me joy is hanging out with my little cousins who are 9, 8, and 7, or 6. I don't know. I'm losing track.
You better get that right. You're going to get in trouble.
They just make me laugh, and they're so playful. And when I go to pick them up, they scream Charisse at the top of their lungs. Walking around in the fresh air brings me joy. Being with kind and loving people. I am an extrovert. I do a lot of work.
No one could tell that.
So I actually do a lot of work at home, pandemic
Yeah.
aside, like if I'm doing this or coaching
Yeah.
or facilitating and I'm not in person, I'm at home. So when I get out in person, and my two most common
Mhm.
places now, actually my most common is the Russell Innovation Center for Entrepreneurship. I'm a stakeholder there now. When
Nice.
I go there and I'm surrounded by other entrepreneurs who are high energy, like
Mm.
that brings me joy. There are so many things. I have this practice, and so again, I'm a yoga practitioner, and I really, really believe in mindfulness and the power of the mind and setting intentions. So a little sidebar: these muscles between our brow, if we frown intentionally, I forgot the names of these muscles. It's multisyllabic. It will actually make your mood sour. We've heard the reverse with smiling,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So, Brett, when I wake up in the morning, I literally smile and stretch and I say, "Hello, day. Nice to meet you."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just started that, and
Mhm.
it's so goofy,
Yeah.
but it works. Oh, and Michelle Obama's latest book, The Light We Carry, she talks about her friend's husband going into the bathroom in the morning and looking at himself in the mirror and saying, "Hey, buddy." It makes you chuckle, right?
Yeah, for sure. For
So
sure.
that's how my morning
Yeah.
greeting makes
I
me
guess,
feel.
yeah, the flip side of that is I remember one time earlier on in my career, I was talking with a student and he wanted to ask permission for something, but as he started to talk, and my those muscles started to contract, and he said, "Stop that! I can see the." So I was like, "Oh, I'm going to try to be an active listener. I'm going to listen with care, sort of thing." So I think that in this midst of finding joy is also about this idea of sustaining it. But what I like about what you're saying, and this is such a theme of this podcast this year, and I think if there's anything that could continue to get across is that whether it be joy or sadness, or you list the range of things, they are all natural part of our being and who we are. So,
Yeah.
I know we're right now we're lumping a lot of things in the anxiety bucket. Not to say that
Yeah.
people don't have real anxiety, for sure.
Mhm.
Maybe there are other things, that more precise way to describe it, and therefore maybe potential pathways of supporting that. But also our bodies are supposed to experience, there's some physical even reaction why anxiety is particularly important. So there's these ranges of things that take place, and it's more about trying not to avoid them, but to embrace and work through them, as a way to find joy, and sustain it. And so I think you're about to say something. I was really asking this question around sustaining it. I think this connects with your also your work around self-care and being a yoga instructor. So kind of
Yeah.
um, mill out it wherever you want in that space.
Yeah. So you made me think of two things. There's a beautiful poem by the Sufi poet Rumi,
Mm.
and it says something like every being is a guest house,
Mm.
and it talks about all the different emotions that come by to visit. And it's like something like welcome them in, sit with them, and make
Mm.
friends with them. And I agree with that 100%. That's all a part of the human experience. But I also was struck by what you said about lumping lots of things into anxiety. I read the beautiful book Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown,
Okay, for sure. Yeah.
and it's basically like an encyclopedia of emotions.
Mhm.
But she starts off with the fact that most people say that they're feeling the same three emotions always, like I'm happy, sad, I'm angry,
Right, right,
and
right,
maybe now we say we're anxious.
right,
But
right.
there's something about language,
Mm.
like the more nuanced ways we're able to name how we're feeling,
Mhm.
maybe the easier it is to navigate through all those emotions rather than
Yeah,
labeling them as good or bad.
yeah.
It's
So
a beautiful work.
I love that, because I think that maybe it's just because of the work I do, but I think that there's a literacy to this. There's a behavioral health
Yes.
literacy in
Yes.
that I don't think everybody should be licensed professional, whatever, but I think if we all from childhood to adulthood gained more literacy, behavioral health literacy, and the understanding of that, we can recognize it in others and ourselves more often. And
Yeah.
then there's self advocacy, efficacy, that movement that could accompany that or support for someone else
Yeah.
by being more literate around behavioral health literacy. I mean, I'm talking about myself
Yeah.
or anybody else. So I think you're really speaking into that. That's so good, and I think so needed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the process of writing the book, and that you talked a little bit about the group that helped provided some discipline and tried to corral Charisse the best way someone can corral and keep you sort of on the path. And so I think you mentioned this, but how long did it take you to write the book, and how did the process of writing really impact you? Um, Answer that, and then I want to get into some other writing the book questions. But talk about how the process of the book impacted the work you do today.
Yeah. So I'll start by saying the book took me 10 months to write. And one of the reasons why I'm such a fan of the Creator Institute, and I have since referred several people who are in the program. And by the way, it was someone I met at the gathering spot who told me about it. And I wasn't even thinking about writing the book. And then I was like, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Things seem to be imploding. Maybe I should check out that website. But the whole premise, so it begins with this idea that 80% of people say they want to write a book, which doesn't surprise me. We all have a book in us. Of the people who even begin, 2% finish.
Oh.
So the process is designed, and Eric Custer is, created this program. He is my writing guru. His whole thing is push to get a first draft out. He said a mediocre first draft. You don't want to be proud of the book. You want to be proud that you got a first draft out. So I started in June of 2020, wrote my first draft, turned in my first draft in October. By the way, Brett, high school students even go through this program.
Okay, I love that.
Pretty life-changing, right?
Yes. Come on.
I get the first draft out, and then I start the pre-sale campaign. So the whole idea is you have a first draft, then you start asking people to pre-purchase your book. Okay. What are you going to do? Say, haha, just kidding, and then go through refunding all of that money, right? Yeah. So you do that. And then I came back in January of 2021, during which I got COVID. This was pre-vaccination. Okay. And published in April of 2021. So I started in 2020, finished in 2021. And how it changed me, Brett, was the same way that anything changes you, that you have to show up day in and day out to complete. It was really fun to get the first draft out. After, it was brutal. When I tell you, I had nightmares that the book was erased. I had nightmares that all of my, footnotes were scrambled. I was listening to this mindfulness podcast, and this guy who wrote books said we should talk less about being happy and talk more about finding meaning. Because if you wanted to be happy, you would never write a book, right?
Yeah.
So, but I was, and then I was sick, and I pushed back the deadline, but I was afraid if I pushed it back too much, I would never finish. Then I was nervous if I got people's stories right. Then I had the who am I to say anything about anything? Who's going to care? But I showed up day after day after day after day, and I did it. And so there aren't many things in life that call upon us to show up like that so consistently.
Mm.
Other times I can think of were opening the Posse sites here, running a half marathon,
Mm.
and studying for the bar exam. Like, we couldn't really tolerate our life always being like that,
Yeah,
but I grew so much stronger and overcoming the fear of what people will think
yeah. Mm.
to put something in the world. And, Seth Godin talks a lot about this in his book, The Practice.
Oh yeah.
You got to keep shipping the work. Having done that, there isn't much that's hard for
Mm.
me to.
Yeah. It's interesting. One thing that we have a future interview with Scott Wittoff, and he writes. He's connected with the D School at Stanford. He's now, I believe, in Austin, and he's wrote his most recent book is called "This Is a Prototype." So I think you might find
Mm,
that a little interesting, and because in many ways, this iteration and not trying to package a perfectly packaged product, and when you ship it, just keep shipping it and shipping it and shipping it, and it's through the iteration that that actually you begin to refine and I hate to say perfect
yeah,
what you're doing, but I love that. I love that so much.
I'm gonna
Um,
check that out. I want to say quickly, Brett, I started
yeah, yeah,
talking to my coaching clients.
yeah.
When we're designing actions at the end of sessions, I'm now starting to talk about designing experiments.
Mm,
That feels lighter. It feels a little
yeah.
playful. It's like you're accepting that it will work out, it won't work out, but you'll learn something and you'll keep going.
Mhm.
So I love that. I feel like I will
Yeah.
like that book.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that there's some nuggets in there that really apply with the work that you're doing. So I don't know. Tell me about the time of the day that you would write.
Yeah. So one of the things about the Creator Institute that I have to say is, like, the program started with us talking about mindset and figuring out
Mhm.
what kind of writer you are. So there's like no right answer. It's like you could wake up in the middle of, first thing in the morning and write every day. But I ended up, I wanted to deeply work on it. So in the beginning, up until getting the first draft out, I wrote on Wednesday mornings,
Okay.
and I wrote all day on Saturday. And I had a buddy that I found in the program, and we would just be sitting there with our camera on, and we know all the research,
Yeah,
right? When
yeah,
you got a buddy or an accountability
yeah.
partner, anything is possible. And then, and I'm still running a new business, so I had to block out that time. And then as time went on, I was just writing
Yeah.
whenever, sometimes I would get in flow, and I'd only plan to write for an hour, and many hours went by. But that was kind of my
Mhm.
cadence initially.
So tell me about the environment. Is it uh, a certain room, candle, music? Like what's that environment that best sets you in a position of your creative self, looking at a blinking cursor, wanting to come out?
Yeah. So when I was at home, I switched it up in lots of different spaces. But when I first started, I religiously went to the gathering spot
Mm.
on Saturdays. It would be almost empty, high ceilings, bright natural sunlight. And it was like that was my writing
Mm.
place. And that's all that I did there on a Saturday. It does really help. Like, I'm constantly throwing these book titles, but this is like how my
Oh, keep
brain
going. No,
works,
this
right?
podcast is perfect for that. Yep.
I'm finally, after, many people telling me to read it, reading Atomic Habits by James
Oh,
Clear,
hello.
right? And
Yes.
about the
Yes.
fact about, like, every space having a function,
Yeah.
so you can get that Pavlovian effect of, like, I'm here, it's time to write. I'm here, it's time to do this. It does help.
What about that the statement? I mean, it was almost like an atomic bomb when I read, what is it? you don't rise to your goals, you fall to your systems.
Absolutely.
Ouch. And so therefore,
Absolutely.
what are your systems? Are they going to be able to reach your goal, or do we need to prototype your system in order
Yep.
to actually rise to your goal? I think to me that was just simple yet so profound, and that statement has had such an impact on me for sure.
Yeah, I went from a person who dreaded cleaning and any household chores to someone who absolutely looks forward to it on Sundays
Yeah.
because I listen to my favorite podcasts back to back while I'm doing it. And
Yeah.
so to me, those two things go together.
Yeah.
Time to do the dishes.
Yeah.
Start with wait, wait, don't tell me.
Okay. That's hilarious. Doing do some habit stacking or habit of affirmation around that. It's interesting. I know offline before we even started, we were talking about the space that I'm in my
Yeah,
office, and so you know, this is one space I can control in my house more than anything, and so it has to be like clean and everything
yeah,
sort of in place for me to okay, then I can begin and do some either deep thinking, deep work, or whatever, or the level of productivity that I need it to be. So,
yeah,
so I love asking this question, especially for people who've written books about environment or the time of the day. I think for anyone who, I know there's a lot out there about how to plan what would an ideal work week look like for you and what are the components of each day. I think those are great exercises, whether you fully fulfill all of it or not. But I think that some of this kind of ties into that a little bit. So I
absolutely.
think let's in terms of goal setting, did you I'm sure the Creators Institute had some recommendations about this, but for you and settling down in the rhythm, so you've got your kind of the time of the days or during the week, you kind of got your environment going, and yet there's this blinking screen. And Chat GPT did not the AI generated could not help you at the moment, which is probably a good thing. But what was kind of were there a certain amount of words that you
Yeah.
tried to produce during those writing sessions?
Yeah, I can't remember. It might have started off as 1,500 words a week or 2,500 words a week. And again, it was about getting them out.
Mm,
So, and one of the things that I really liked, again, lots of methodologies you were given to play around with. I loved kind of snippet writing.
mm,
Like if I had a bunch of thoughts and reactions to an interview, I
mm,
would write it. It might be 500 words. If I read an article, like I went down this whole
mm.
rabbit hole. I did way more research than I thought I would do.
Yeah.
Um, I might have a reaction to an article that I read many times because I listen to WABE.
Mm.
Shout out to WABE. I'm important. I would often be driving. Like I remember, I mentioned in the book, I listened to. I think he was and then wasn't and then is again. I think Surgeon General Vivek Murthy. He wrote a book
Oh.
called
Mhm.
Together in a World That's Sometimes Lonely. And I listened to that and I had so many thoughts and feelings. So I wrote about that and that went into my chapter on community. So for me, it was more about getting out my thoughts and
Mm.
ideas and responses and my own stories. That worked for me. And then I worried about cohesion and where everything fit later.
Okay. Yeah. Now I love the process of that, and sometimes, what's interesting is I think I discussed this on another podcast with someone about when thinking even about mental health. What I've learned even most recently, I wish I'd have learned this earlier in life, is that sometimes we feel like we have to be in the right disposition or mindset in order to get out of where we are. But in many cases, it's actually the physical movement. It is the movement of then what transpires over that are different emotions or thoughts or ideas. But sometimes we just stay so stationary, and yet in trying to get out of something. So it makes me think about the process of writing, in that you're just trying to get out your thoughts. You're not trying to perfectly package them. You don't have the right transitions, the right introductory clauses, the right gerund, subject and predicates, but that will sort of come later. And how prioritizing, even from a writing process, I think is so reflective of just life itself. So thanks for sharing.
100%.
Yeah.
One of my favorite quotes is there's no such thing as writer's block. There's just writing or not writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I hate to admit this, especially to you. I've never journaling has always been a challenge for me to do that, and yeah, I think probably over indexing and overthinking, and something I've not really done a lot in the past is yoga itself. And I know this is part of your life story about how that's played an important role in your life and how you've impacted other people. So maybe in 2023, you might have to send me to the right place to get some instruction for such a beginner.
Sounds good.
So do you have another book you're talking about? No pressure.
I have several thoughts about what might be the next book, but what is next is definitely my own podcast.
Oh, hello.
So working on that.
Okay.
And then you talked about planning. Like, I'm obsessed with planning. And it started with when I started using the Panda productivity planner in 2018.
Okay. Yeah.
And I've used many different ones, and now I'm creating my own this year.
Okay. Yeah.
And the reason why I've developed that obsession is because, in the most simple terms, like, time is the container that holds our entire lives, our hopes, our dreams, our aspirations, our priorities. And if we are not intentional about that, and by intentional, I don't mean robotic. Like, you might have a block of time where it's like, I'm gonna, daydream and meander about. Like, that's productive too. But the end of my coaching conversations always come down to, okay, what action items are you going to take and when? And there is also no such thing as not enough time. There's like doing and not doing, because we all have the same amount of time.
Yeah, for sure.
So, just kind of making time for the things that matter most to me, so that I can, do my work, fulfill my mission, have incredible connections, and hopefully leave this world a little bit better than I found it, or at least every individual that I touch.
Well, I think you're certainly on the right path of that, and in a very unorthodox way, on a video podcast. I'm actually going to look up something on my computer because you've inspired me today, and I think this is the best way to close out this podcast with you. So I'm pulling it up on my screen. So thanks for the unorthodox nature of doing that. I'm sure as a podcaster, as a host, you will perfect this much better than I have. And so let me close with this. This is a liturgy. Give us the courage to rest, the holy audacity to do absolutely nothing at all. Grant us slowness that allows us to feel what hurts and makes healing possible. Let our rest be our liberation. Give us the courage to rest.
That is so beautiful.
So with that, Charisse Williams, what a joy to have you on the Counter Service Leadership Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. It was such an honor. Have a wonderful day.
Great. Thank you.